I was 26, and I was so sick of the snow and the ice in Michigan. I was substitute teaching. I didn't like driving in the snow, so I stayed home. Like around noon, I'm just kind of waking up, and I looked outside my blinds, and there's like this odd car parked behind the apartment, and it wouldn't leave. All of a sudden, there was a knock at my door. Dad had ingrained in me, stranger danger, make them prove to you who they are. So I cracked the door and I put my foot in it. I'm like, well, maybe I can stop him from coming in. He's like, I need to question you. So I'm like, what is going on? He's like, if you heard of BTK.
An individual who has the uncontrollable desire to kill.
The community in shock over the arrest of the suspected so-called BTK killer.
BTK, bind, torture, and kill.
And then he goes, your dad is BTK.
Dennis Rader.
Dennis Rader.
Dennis L. Rader.
59 years old, Rader is married with 2 children. He was an active member of Christ Lutheran Church, a scout leader, and worked for the suburban community of Park City as a compliance officer.
The seemingly ordinary family man who's accused of killing at least 10 people over the last 3 decades.
For years, police in Wichita, Kansas say Dennis Rader lived and killed among his friends and neighbors.
He was doing all the things that every other dad was doing.
A sexual sadist. To kill was the thrill.
Can you imagine finding out that your father is one of the most evil people on earth?
I don't know who my father is, what he was hiding. Was he using my family to hide? Was he using us that whole time? It's hard to know who I am if every moment in my life was a lie. I would have sworn a year ago that my father had just murdered 10 people. I had been told from the get-go by the FBI, the detectives, oh, just the 10, just the 10, it was just the 10.
We've got a possible twist in the case involving the notorious BTK killer.
This morning, authorities say the notorious BTK killer, who terrorized people in Kansas during the 1970s, could be linked to 2 more unsolved cases in other states.
And I was like, what is going on? And the next thing I know, the police called me to talk about it. I know him better than anyone probably in the world. Investigators can go in with all their knowledge and all their evidence, but I'm the one that can crack his codes and crack him. If my father has committed more murders, it's important to know, because it gives answers to the families that have been waiting for decades. Those families deserve answers, and the truth is the truth. But the counter argument is, my life has value too, and to what level do I sacrifice? And what level do I put myself through trauma to try to help? My father was arrested in 2005, and I was 26. We had everybody from Oprah to Larry King trying to interview us, Diane Sawyer, and my family just said no. So we had declined everything. I'm checking all the boxes right. I'm cooking, I'm raising kids, stay-at-home mom, leading women's ministry. You would say, hey, she's doing great. But the truth was that I was dying inside. They just didn't know I was hiding. I spent almost 10 years rotting inside after he was arrested, not being able to speak, not thinking I was allowed to speak. The Midwest code, you don't ever air your dirty laundry publicly. You just keep it inside and you look appropriate on the outside. That's how I was raised. And then in September of 14, I was headed to bed, and Darian, my husband at the time, he goes, hey, Stephen King was on a morning TV show. He was talking about your parents because he wrote a short story and made a movie called The Good Marriage.
Tell us about this. I mean, Dennis Rader, the guy who's this real life sort of.
He's the prototype for the guy in my story, and he murdered 10 people. 2 of them were children, and he had a long marriage, 2 kids of his own. And his wife said after he was caught that she never knew.
I'm sitting up in bed, I'm upset, I'm crying, I'm out of the bed, walking back and forth, just really upset. Like even upset at my husband and upset at Stephen King and just like wishing none of this was happening. I had been silent for so long and there was so much stuff that needed to come out. My first interview ever, I just spilled my guts for like 40 minutes about who I was, who my dad was, my mom, my life, married, what the last 10 years have been like. And I was headline news like by that night and then international news by the next day.
Carrie, thank you for taking some time to come on the program.
Thank you for having me. When the FBI agent notified me, I was like holding on to the wall. Everything I cared for was gone. I was killing myself, internalizing this and not talking about it. I wasn't thinking it was that big of a deal. I wasn't watching my mouth. I had upset a lot of people with the words just coming out of me. And I just was like upset that he had decided to use my parents for inspiration. I'm gonna always love my dad. I mean, he's my dad. But I hadn't really got into what my father had done as BTK. I hadn't gone into the crimes, and I was in therapy, and it was getting all really mixed up. Was he using my family to hide? Did he really love my mom? Did he really love us, or was he using us that whole time? I kind of went and grabbed everything and researched my own life and researched my dad's life to be able to talk about it. It was all just a big jumbled mess. In 1974, my dad destroyed 4 members of a 7-member family. A few months before that, he had been laid off from Cessna. And he really liked that job. And so he said when he got laid off in the fall of '73, he got depressed and moody and bored. And he said, idle hands make for devil's work. And he started thinking about bad things and putting those into action.
In 1974, I was a bureau captain for the Wichita Police Department. Our police chief retired, and there was a nationwide search for a new police chief. And I thought, well, what the heck? I think I'll put in for it. I won't get it, but I'll put in for it. I think there was 110 applicants or something. I ended up with the job.
Wichita was a very calm Midwestern city. People go about their business. And Wichita, at that time, you didn't lock your doors, you didn't lock your car. It was just a very calm, wonderful place to live.
Well, some of the things that I did when I first became the chief, there were some major cases that were going on that had happened in the past. Of course, when I became chief, the possibility of a serial killer didn't enter my mind.
The bodies of Joseph Otero, his wife Julie, their daughter Josephine, and their son Joseph II were discovered in their East Wichita home.
In 1974, I was just a photojournalist at Cake Television, and I was sent to a house. We knew that there had been a homicide there. We didn't know how many. We didn't have any details on it. I noticed that nobody was talking. The detectives had clammed up.
Older boy, Charlie, was coming home from school, and he walked in and found this horrendous scene. His parents murdered, his brother and sister murdered, and he completely lost it. He tried to untie them, and then he ran next door to seek help. Traumatic for him. It would have been for anyone.
This is a very bizarre case for this area of the country. I think it's the worst one that I've seen in the 30 years that I've been involved in homicide work, and we're not going to give up on it.
It was just a horrible, terrible murder. How could anybody kill a child? That didn't happen here.
I was briefed in the Otero case from the command staff in investigations. The direction that they were taking was that because of the nature of the crime, they thought it was some kind of a revenge crime or perhaps some kind of a drug-related thing. But then again, the other investigators were looking at the sexual aspect of it. Keep in mind, there's not just one or two investigators on this. There are several, and they're going in several different directions to try to solve this thing.
It's depressing to see Wichita just run down in places. You know, like it's always been run down in places, but it's just depressing as hell. It is not pleasant to go to Wichita. I mean, it is high levels of PTSD. Something will instantly hit me and I will go into trauma world. I totally forgot that I used to ride bikes and hike along this ditch with Dad. Dad taught me the back roads and how to drive those instead of the highway. He actually had more patience and was calmer and cooler about it than my mom. My mom would freak out. He was pretty fun to hang out with because he would let you do what you wanted and get into trouble and get dirty, and he didn't care. This is Christ Lutheran Church here at 53rd and Hillside.
Mom and Dad met at church in August of '70.
It was like love at first sight for both of them. And they got married 9 months later. Probably my earliest memories are when I was 2 or 3. My house was a 3-bedroom house. We had a big garden growing up. Dad built us this massive tree house on stilts. We used to camp out in the tree house. We helped with yard work. He taught me how to garden, how to plant flowers. He took me to the hardware store every Saturday to get stuff when we were building the tree house. My dad never treated me like a girl. He treated me like a tomboy and let me do whatever he was doing. So as soon as I was walking, I was right there by him.
Carrie and I are the same age, so we went through school together. She was from the same neighborhood, so we did Halloweens together. We did soccer team together. We did everything. It was a very small community, small town, so you knew everybody. Growing up with the Raiders, they were like every other family. I mean, he did all the things that all the dads did. We called him the dog catcher of Park City.
We've been tracking it down. The dogs are somewhat territorial as well as vicious, and we've been trying to round them up and corral them as best we can, working with the reporting parties of where the sheep were killed.
He didn't just do dog catching, he also did violations for if your weeds are too high or whatever. If somebody got a violation in Park City, we would always make a joke oh, Dennis had his little ruler out again.
My father, on the outside, looked like a very well-behaved, mild-mannered man, but there's these moments of Dad, something will trigger him and he can flip on a dime and it can be dangerous. And as a kid, you just knew, I better not have my shoes out because I'm gonna get yelled at about my shoes. So you just knew not to sit in Dad's chair at the kitchen table. You knew to let him get lunch first. You let him choose what activities you were gonna do, what movies, where you were going. A lot of control, right? And now you realize who my father is, what he was hiding.
The Wichita Eagle was a daily newspaper. We We had about 125 people working in the newsroom. That would include photojournalists, that would include sports, business, whatever. Virtually everybody. It was exciting. Otero was talked about for a long time because you didn't have 4 people killed, including children, before. I should point out that there's a lot of stuff about this that wasn't known until later. The police would say this was vicious, or this is what they did, or they tied this one up. But there's so much that was not known. We knew it was horrible, but we didn't know how horrible.
We had to keep certain things in the investigation secret. In other words, we didn't want the community to know some of the details. And then in October of '74, the department arrested the Sebring brothers. These guys were pedophiles, is what they were. They admitted, once they got in, that they had killed the Otero family. Well, of course, this was major news, and it was drawing a lot of attention from the news media, and that prompted the letter.
The Wichita Eagle gets this letter. Someone came forward and says, hey, the 3 guys in jail you have didn't do it. And the reason I know is basically I did it.
The details that were depicted in that clearly indicated that the person that wrote the letter was the person that committed the crime. At the time, he was seeking identity.
The letter said, and I quote, I write this letter to you for the sake of the taxpayer as well as your time. Those 3 dudes you have in custody, they know nothing at all. I did it all by myself. And then he starts to talk about each person he killed. Bondage, hand tied with blind cord. Feet and lower knees, upper knees and waist with a clothesline cord, all one length. Death, strangulation. The police department had to have cold chills because they have pictures of what it was like. He's describing it totally, 100% accurately. He added a PS to his note. PS, since sex criminals do not change their MO or by nature cannot do so, I will not change mine. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. You'll see he's at it again. They will be on the next victim.
Of course, keep in mind, you're not dealing with a, quote, normal criminal. You're dealing with a person who is perverted, a person that is sick. And with all probability, assuming that the person is still alive, that person is going to kill again.
We had profilers from the FBI that was providing us information. And what we were being told was, if he's not killing here, he's killing someone else, somewhere else. And so we put out an alert to other departments, and we sent detectives to several different places to see if we had some kind of a killer that was hitting other places, and we could never put those together at all. And our conclusion was that the reason we couldn't find this individual is that he's one of us.
To feel cheerful and happy again.
Now we have someone locally that we need to concentrate on and we need to identify.
Dan Henry, W2 attempt, and the dead child.
Shirley Vian was a single mother. She had 3 children. She was home ill at the time and was not feeling well. So Shirley had sent her 6-year-old out to the store. And then on his way back, he's confronted with this man with a briefcase, and a discussion between them took place. And as a result of that discussion, whatever that was, the man gained entry into the house. The assailant locks the 3 children in the bathroom. They recognize that he's doing something terrible to their mother. So as a result of that, they're able to escape through the window of the bathroom in order to scream and seek for help. Once the assailant ran out of the house, the kids go back in, and of course they find their mother dead on the bed. When this case came in, the investigators informed me that after viewing the scene, that they believed that this could be connected to the Otero case because of the way the scene was left.
26-year-old Shirley Vian was found with a plastic bag over her head and a cord looped around her neck. Her children, who were locked in a bathroom, told police the attacker was a dark-haired man in his late 30s or 40s.
At the time, it was decided not to make a direct correlation between them until it could be determined for sure.
You will find a homicide. Self-searching. Nancy Fox. Self-searching is correct.
25-year-old Nancy Jo Fox was found dead in her Pershing Street apartment. She had been bound and strangled. The slaying was reported by a man in a phone booth. Police theorized the caller was the murderer.
If you recognize that voice, call 268-4156.
With the Nancy Fox case, the phone line had been cut, similar to the Otero case. Based on the evidence that we had, it was clear in our mind at that point that the Otero case, the Shirley Vian case, and the Nancy Fox case were a result of the same individual. And that set the investigation off for a serial killer. On February 10th, 1978, I received a call from Larry Hatterberg asking me to come over and look at a letter that they had received at Cake Television.
The receptionist who sorted our mail found this letter from BTK. And she brought it back into the newsroom and she handed it to me. I opened it, I looked at it, and I thought, oh my God, here we go. We confront the chief of police. We say, we've got this letter, and here's the letter. In return, we would like you to come and be on our newscast tonight. And I thought he was going to say no. And he called in the chief of detectives. They conversed for about 20 minutes, and then they come out and he says, okay, I will be on your newscast tonight.
With us right now is Chief of Police Richard Lemunion. I have a couple of questions, Chief. How can you be sure that the BTK letter is authentic?
There's absolutely no question that the only person who would have the type of information that was included in the letter would have to be the killer himself.
BTK began today's letter with a question. How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention? BTK claims to have strangled a total of 7 women. He provided a list of his victims beginning with the number 5, where he wrote, you guessed the motive and the victim.
This was the first time that anyone outside the police department was made aware that there was a connection between the Otero murders, the Vian murders, and the Fox murders, and a 7th murder that hadn't been identified.
We have an obligation to the community to figure out who this new victim was. Any way that we could keep him communicating with us, hopefully would give us the opportunity to put together enough evidence to get some answers and find out who this individual was.
I always felt that Richard Lemunion was the finest police chief that Wichita had ever had. Richard Lemunion was one of those police chiefs who, when he got on a mission to find a criminal, he didn't let go. He was like a dog, and he had the information in his teeth, and he wasn't going to let anybody else derail him from his mission.
This morning, Police Chief Richard Lemunion met with detectives working on the case. Police frankly admit that they have lots of tips to check, but nothing to indicate a major break in the case. Tonight, Munyon will gather with a group of experts to study all the available evidence in the investigation.
In the letter to Kate, BTK talked about killing 7 people, but he did not name one of his victims. There have been many unsolved homicides over the years, and police aren't sure who the 7th BTK victim was. Several sources in the department, however, think it was Catherine Bright.
In April of 1974, a man named Kevin Bright was shot in the head and ran outside yelling that there was a man in the house that had shot him and that his sister, Catherine, was in there and that he had come in to rob them.
Catherine Bright's brother, Kevin, had witnessed part of the murder, and he was able to tell police to some degree what happened.
We found Catherine Bright stabbed in her house. Catherine was a college student at Wichita State University. She normally came home alone. In this particular case, she came home with her brother, Kevin. In the middle of the day, the assailant was in the house already waiting on her. Based on what Kevin told us, once they entered the house, the person in there had a gun on Kevin and instructed him to tie his sister, Catherine, up. He did so, and then Kevin was taken to another room, and he attempted to put a nylon on Kevin's neck, and that's when a fight ensued, and Kevin was shot. He fell to the floor and played dead. Kevin was taken to the hospital with head wounds. We worked with him in an effort to identify the assailant. Kevin's description was pretty generic. He's a Caucasian male, perhaps around 30, normal, 180 pounds. Basically, he just couldn't help us.
Remember that it was only until BTK said, yes, I did all these, that the demand that something get done about it, quintupled. And the feeling that he is still here and that he is still working. And for all I know, he lives next door, which as it turned out, he did.
Man, this street is beat up. My best friend lived there. I babysit people there. My babysitter lived on the other side there. So this is it. But this is where I grew up. They leveled it so it wouldn't be torn apart by people selling it on eBay piece by piece. There was just a lot that happened after I spoke up in the media, and it was like Wichita kind of became this enemy territory. So the first time I got back to my yard was in 15. I mean, I hadn't been in my yard in that lot in 10 years. I mean, on one hand, I can tell you like a million memories and what I did in this tree and what I did in that tree. So this is where Dad and I gardened all the time. He had every kind of vegetable. Then there was a flower garden here. So all of this to here was garden. There was a path here that came up. There was a walking path back here. And Dad planted grapes in here, which was crazy. They were gross and sour. You almost can see, I think you can see some of the vines still in there. The grapes was one of his crazier ideas. Is she taking photos? And somebody tell me if she's taking photos.
No, she is not.
It's really hard to be there because it takes me back to those places, right? So even if everything was good in my yard, you're still right there by that house where everything wasn't always good, where you're right there where Dad was. I mean, even today, I can talk about it down to the detail of what my father has done. My father has done what we know. But to actually believe it, it still goes in and out now. It's like Dad is BTK. Oh, what? Huh? It's like it doesn't come all the way home still. That's another thing. People push back on it. They're like, wait. Like, why is she saying in one moment, like, she's a victim, and then why is she crying, or why is she upset? And then the next minute she's talking about how great life is. And I'm like, because that's what my life was. Like, it was mainly good with like these flashes of bad, you know? And we didn't understand, like, underneath that flash was this whole iceberg of bad. I mean, if you look at it, it's abandoned. It's like what happened to my family. Like, the fence is all rotted and torn down. I don't even know why it's back there. It's just all decayed and gross. Our family imploded. You know, it took a long time. But the trauma of my father imploded us, and so here we are.
She doesn't have to go through this on a daily basis. Do you understand that?
Carrie Rawson got a gig she didn't sign up for. Everywhere she goes, when people understand that BTK was her father, then she becomes BTK's daughter. How do you outlive that?
I had been hiding everything about my father, my life, the abuse, the trauma, because some public will absolutely, like, treat you terrible for being the kid of a serial killer. Like, what were you hiding? Why didn't you know? Why didn't you expose them to the world? I was waiting really for somebody to come along and give me a chance to help or talk. Like, Osage County is having me consult on this investigation. It's not like I've chosen this. Like, it's what I have been given. It's my life, and you have to choose what to do with it.
You ready to dig into this stuff?
Always. Never.
I think one of the things that's going to help us out with some of these answers is getting you back up in this area to see what your memories are. And that helps us understand and clarify the picture of where your dad may have been, or where he really didn't have any activity that you're aware of.
So in the public from 74 through 79, there was these communications being dropped in Wichita from BTK to the newspaper and the police, news stations, weird letters, poems, somebody claiming to have murdered 7 people. This was all happening really before I was born, or right when I was little. So the last letter was sent in 79. Later, I found out it was the night of my first birthday. My dad had a first birthday party for me and then went out in the summer in a jean jacket and sent a communication. And that was the last BTK communication for a long time. He said later on that having kids slowed down his murders. Dad said he got busy raising kids. Well, I think he got busy, like, chasing me. So I have photos here, and it's all, like, just a mix of years. Like, one of the things I really enjoyed with my dad was going to the Grand Canyon. And so we went in 86, just to the rim. And then in 95, we spent a week on the rim. It was snowing and it was cold. And I actually slept in a tent next to my dad because I was cold. And I was glad to have him because he was warm. We took these amazing family vacations. We camped and hiked a ton, did a lot of fishing and camping in Kansas. Hiked up in Colorado up around Durango, the reservoirs up there, we would do day hikes and we would fish for trout. And we did traveling in like Yellowstone and the Tetons and all of that. I mean, when you're looking at these photos, like you just see a normal family, right? My father just flew under the radar and they didn't find him for 31 years because he was literally right under their noses. They weren't looking for somebody like my father, the everyday man that actually does have a family.
The Otero murder was in 1974. There was the Otero murder, then another murder, then another murder, then some other murders. And I mean, it was just building onto itself. And then nothing.
30 years ago today, 15-year-old Charlie Otero comes home from school to find his entire family murdered. And so begins the most infamous unsolved serial killing spree in Wichita history.
The newspaper did a 30th anniversary story. 30 years ago, the Otero family was killed, then subsequent killings over that. But we haven't heard from BTK since then. No one knew what had happened to him. There were lots of theories, and I remember the theories were that A, he was incarcerated for another crime, B, he had died, or he had just left the country or left the area, never to be seen again.
When I first started here in the Wichita market in 1984 as an anchor, BTK was like this, oh, by the way, there's this thing called BTK. He killed in the 70s, and everything's all right now, and he's either dead or in prison. And that's what it was, a legend. No one thought twice about BTK. He wasn't on anyone's lips. And that's the reason why he reappeared.
This is a breaking news alert from Cake on your side.
Good evening, everyone. The serial killer who terrorized Wichita for years is causing new fears tonight.
Police now say it appears BTK is back in Wichita. And the way he reappeared was so incredibly shocking. He sent the Wichita newspaper a driver's license from a killing that nobody even knew he was a part of.
A letter received by Cake TV was turned over to us last Wednesday. We're proceeding on the possibility that this letter is from BTK, and we have turned this letter over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
After BTK sent that letter, my boss came to me and said, "Hey, we've been invited to participate. You want to go?" And I said, "Well, absolutely, absolutely."
BTK claims in the letter that Vicki Wegerle was his 8th victim. She was found strangled in her home in September 1986, years after BTK's last known contact.
That letter included photographs taken at a crime scene. The crime scene was of the victim, Vicki Wegerle, and she was murdered in her home. The thing about her murder is that when the emergency services crew arrived, the ambulance transported her from there in an attempt to save her life before any police detectives or any photographs could be taken at the crime scene. There were no police photographs of that crime scene. But these photographs BTK sent us clearly show that victim in her home, basically dead. And so we knew whoever this was, he was the real deal. He was, in fact, BTK.
Can you imagine how he was overjoyed by this headline? That was his goal, to get the publicity. He got it. We were just as much in shock as the average person on the street. Everyone in the media, and to a certain extent, police officers were like, "What?
Just as everyone in Wichita, Cake employees were hoping BTK was an old story, just an old case. But now that police say BTK is back, old fears return.
Stephen Relford was 5 years old when BTK murdered his mother, but what may be worse is that he and his 2 siblings had to hear it all.
I still go through it today.
You do?
Yes, ma'am.
What do you go through?
I'm the one that opened the door to some let him in, you know. You never forget that.
It was one of the most shocking revelations of my career. And the worst part was, what was he going to do next to get publicity?
As soon as this started to hit the media, the phone was ringing off the hook, emails were coming in, there were leads coming in, people suggesting who they believe BTK might be or whatever kind of tips. And you can't work all those. I mean, you can't handle each and every one. But which one do you decide not to work? Is that the one that's going to be the one? It's very, very difficult.
Well, let me tell you what we got here. Let's see. We got a very suspicious letter that was sent to us. The outside from a Thomas B. King.
The second communication he sent after he resurfaced was to Cake TV.
Yes, yeah, I've asked for the Lenore.
And it was the BTK story, the book he wanted to write about himself. And then it said chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4.
The BTK story. A serial killer is born. Dawn, fetish, fantasy world. The search begins. BTK haunts PJs. No, I did rise. Hits, treasured memories. Final curtain call. Dusk. Will there be more?
The 13th chapter. Will there be more? Nobody knew whether he wanted publicity that badly that he would kill again.
The FBI, the Behavioral Sciences Unit, gave us instruction right from the start. They said, your best chances of catching BTK are if you can keep him communicating, make him feel comfortable in communicating with you. And after that, we began to receive communications about every month or 6 weeks.
Just last week, 3 packages were sent to a local TV station containing jewelry, perhaps from a victim.
It was in the UPS box. The UPS man opened an envelope that contained pictures and a letter from BTK.
Now he seemed to dare them to come find him, teasing them with cryptic clues that may be true or maybe not.
We knew he was watching us because he would write things that indicated that he was watching us on a nightly basis.
I had mentioned during the 10 o'clock news, Jeff and I both have a cold. We got the crud or something. 2 days later, we get a letter and it said, I hope Susan's and Jeff's cold gets better. I still get the same complete feeling of fear in my body when I talk about it.
This is one of the most challenging cases that I've ever been involved with. And I find that the individual that is doing this would be very interesting to talk to.
This one is a postcard. It's not a letter. It says between 69th North and 77th North on Seneca. Contents: Post Toasties box. PJ, Little Mex, and doll. Let me know somehow if you or Wichita PD received this.
So in this particular communication, he gives another clue to the police department. There's a Post Toasties box on this corner. Right away, we sent a reporter and a photographer out there. It was way out on a country road under a stop sign, and we got all kinds of footage.
Lieutenant Ken Landwehr and Detective Kelly Otis arrive a short time later, and investigators spend hours at the scene. Police have asked us not to reveal the location until they have time to investigate.
The police came and got the cereal box. They're the ones who opened it up, and inside was a Barbie doll with a noose around its neck.
Through his cereal box communications, he expressed his desire to communicate with us through floppy disks. And he was concerned that we might be able to track him down. And he said, "Will it identify me?" And then he said something very interesting. He said, "Be honest." And then after that, he directed us to make our reply through the newspaper and say, "Rex, it will be okay." Kenny Landwehr placed the ad just like BTK had asked, and he followed up and sent us a disc. The metadata indicated it had been used at the Park City Public Library, Christ Lutheran Church, and then a username, and the name was simply Dennis. Within minutes, cross-checking the two organizations that was listed showed that a person by the name of Dennis Rader was the congregational president of Christ Lutheran Church. The IT people of Wichita PD were just, they were thrilled. And eventually, they came up with an address in Park City, just outside of Wichita. I was ready. I was like, this is it. Let's go get him. But Kenny Landwehr said, we need to know absolutely that this is BTK. We need to get his DNA. I noticed that his daughter had attended Kansas State University. And I knew from having attended the university that if you're a student there and you have any kind of medical issue, you're going to go through Lafayette Student Health Center. And I said, I'm going to stop in and see if they have anything. Records indicate while she was a student here, she had a pap smear. They surrendered the sample to me. I submitted it for DNA analysis. And eventually, I got a phone call. It is the offspring of your BTK. So the first phone call I made was to Kenny Landwehr. Kenny, it's him. Oh, all right, we'll see you first thing in the morning.
That morning, the newsroom started picking up monitor traffic from the police department, and our assignment folks said, something's going down in Park City. Don't know what, but somebody needs to get up there.
We knew that Dennis Rader worked for the city of Park City and that he leaves, he goes home for lunch every day. And so we set up on a road adjacent to his home and waited for him to drive around. When he went by us, the marked car pulled out behind him, flipped on his emergency lights, got him to pull over. In my mind, I was thinking, he's gonna know this is the end. And I think he's gonna want to go out in a blaze of glory. And I didn't want that. And I pulled up by the uniform marked car, and I got to Dennis Rader's truck just at the time he was opening the door and starting to get out. I just grabbed him and just spun him around, took him straight down to the concrete. At that point, I was joined by several other members of the task force. And we get him handcuffed, pick him up, and I'm standing there, still got a hold of him. And he turns to me and looks at me and says, "Would you mind telling my wife I won't be home for lunch? I assume you know where I live."
My father was arrested in 2005, and I was 26. And, the whole world just upended on me and my husband. We had been married 18 months. We were really just kids living in Michigan alone, no family. And we had one interview with the FBI that first weekend, and then it was like, see ya later, you're on your own. I was extremely mad. I was mad about the DNA. I thought it was an invasion of my privacy. I was embarrassed about the pap smear. I was already mad at the police. I was mad at the FBI. I was mad at everybody. It was just, our lives was just gone upheaval, totally insane. I was just mad at everybody.
After the arrest, I got assigned to execute the search warrant of the house that Dennis Rader lived in with his wife. When I walked in the door, the first thing I was confronted with was pictures on the wall above the couch that showed him and the family attending K-State functions, KSU functions, football games, whatever, all kinds of things. And I was like, oh, wow. The stuff that we found in the house just kind of created more questions in my mind. For example, as you enter the front door is like a coat closet. But on the shelf, right above the coats, was a kill kit. It was a little bag that had pre-knotted ropes, a bandana, there were handcuffs, a .32 auto pistol. The shed out back had some interesting things in there, some trophies, jewelry, things that had touched their skin, clothing, underwear in particular. He kept all of it. Stuff that obviously could have been used, might have been used in torturing some of his victims. As an investigator, I found it very, very disturbing. And I thought, boy, this is really giving us a look at his mind.
This is the hot spot, drawing hundreds out here just to come by and see the scene. Park City, a small community where everyone knows everyone else, or so they thought.
I talked to his wife, and she was in absolute denial. She said, oh no. She said, she was very nice, very cordial. She didn't scream at us. She said, oh no, you've got the wrong person. And while we were talking with her, Carrie called in.
We didn't get a hold of my mom until later that day, and she was a mess. She was like me. Her and I just couldn't compute together.
She told Carrie, she said, you know your father. You know this is not right. This has been a horrible mistake. He is not a killer. This is not him.
I didn't think I was going to make it through that night.
I mean, you're two people who live together, interact together, share a lot of things in common. Do I think she knew anything? No. Probably as close as she ever came was they were sitting watching television, and one of the media outlets was reading one of the communications. And after the news feature was over, she said, that BTK guy, he writes just like you do. And he did not say anything, but I got the distinct impression down deep in my gut, had she pursued that, he'd have gotten rid of her.
Dennis, I have a question to answer. Mm-hmm. How do you think we came to come and talk to you?
Well, I don't know. As a suspect, I assume you have something on.
Aren't you curious what it is?
Well, yeah.
You want us to share that with you?
His initial interview was with Kenny Landwehr and one of the behavioral scientists from the FBI. Kenny basically laid out, all the damning evidence that we had against him.
You know what that is? A floppy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the reasons why there were a whole lot of money used on computer forensic people were kiddie porn.
Pardon? Oh, it was kiddie porn.
And so the FBI and locals got really good at looking at people's discs and being able to track those down.
That's interesting.
So if we receive something like that, then we can go in there and we can find that it came from Christ Lutheran Church. Then we can go to some of those computers and find out that person that was logged onto that would be Dennis.
And when it came to the DNA, he knew that was it. Kenny Landwehr told him, he said, we got your DNA match through your daughter.
Things have occurred medically with your children. And I can take those samples, I can test those, and I know that BTK was the mother of your children. That's what brings me to you.
And I think that really sunk him. You could tell. He said, Dennis, he said, tell us Tell us who you are.
Why don't you just say it?
Yes, you guys know. What else?
Say who you are.
BTK.
BTK.
Once he was able to say that to law enforcement, I mean, the floodgates just opened, and he talked about every crime, 2 crimes that we hadn't previously linked to him.
That's Project Darkside. That's the code name for her. I basically had some free time in the evening. I killed her on Friday night.
January 19th, 1991, Dolores D. Davis abducted from her home. Her body was found 13 days later under a bridge in northern Sedgwick County.
Well, I proceeded to tie her up, and then I think she realized that that's what's going to go bad. She said, "Don't kill me, don't kill me." And I slipped the pantyhose over her head and strangled her. Took her up there, dropped her off under the bridge.
January of 91, now my mom is really sick and she's in the hospital for like 10 or 12 days with pneumonia. And Dad's all stressed out because he's out of work. We don't have enough money. He's trying to cook for us. He couldn't cook. He made weird eggs. Not long after that, he murdered Mrs. Davis. He put her body in the back of our station wagon. He then gave me that station wagon to drive in high school. I was like, no, that's not okay. Thinking that Mrs. Davis had been in that vehicle.
I have been assigned the investigation of Marine Hedge. And kind of like to know, how did you get drawn to her? Well, as I explained to the other guys, I had a whole bunch of these my old projects. She's Project Flower, no, Cookie, Project Cookie.
I remember when I was 6, our neighbor, Mrs. Hedge, had gone missing. They found her body a couple weeks later, and that she was found strangled.
Did this on a scout thing. It's a good cover for a guy like me. You go out and camp out and slip away. I parked my car at the bowling alley. I got a bowling bag, and I buy beer, jump at the lines, pop this real quiet, like creep in here.
My dad's hit kit from Hedge's murder. It was a maroon bowling bag, old with a white stripe. Dad didn't bowl. We only went bowling a few times. You know, why is my mom not being, like saying, hey, why do you have a bowling bag all of a sudden? But where it gets crazy is that after he murdered Mrs. Hedge in her bed, he carried her out in a blanket, put her in her car, in the trunk, took her to Christ Lutheran Church where we go to church, and then he undresses her, changes her clothes, and he takes photographs while he does bondage on her dead body.
So you'd already decided he's going to take her to church. Yeah. Whether alive or dead, she was going to that church. Basically, I was trying to work toward the BTK liar, the home, the torture chamber thing. That's what I was working toward in my fantasy world.
When I was a kid, I remember one Sunday, I'm at Christ Lutheran Church, and I'm climbing these really tall, narrow pine trees that I always climbed at church. When they found Mrs. Hedge a few weeks later, they found some weird long pine needles next to her body. And they didn't know where they came from because pines are pretty rare in Kansas. To have a pine tree here, you've had to plant it. Those pine needles came from those pine trees I climbed at church.
It was clear to me that he was very proud of these killings. He wished out loud to us that there were more. He told us, he said, if I was a lone wolf without all my social obligations, family, church, work, he said, if I didn't have to do all that, there would have been a lot more murders.
The national media is starting to gather here, and we're getting people from Good Morning America, from CNN, Dateline, Primetime Live. They will all be converging on Wichita as the day progresses, because this story is a story of national proportions.
Of course, everyone's covering it live, and the Wichita police chief says,
the bottom line, BTK is arrested.
A cheer went up in the crowd. There was a crowd there at that news conference. And the national media was there going, who are these people cheering? But they didn't understand the relief we felt that he was finally captured.
For the city of Wichita, its police and its victims. Relief today after authorities arrested 59-year-old Dennis Rader.
It's kind of unbelievable, but it's good. It's good. So we'll get it all come out in the end, and he'll get his what's due him.
It was a law enforcement team effort.
What do you think about the fact that he's lived in this community for all these years? Living, breathing, working.
He's a smart, stupid son of a bitch.
It's all right.
I remember my brother calling me the morning of the press conference. He said, they're saying that it's the Park City dog catcher. And I remember going, what? I mean, Park City dog catcher, there's only one Park City dog catcher. That's Carrie's dad. I'll never forget my dad going, there's no way it was Dennis. And then I was glued to the television.
Neighbors who I've talked to remember the people who lived at the house where the police converged on.
It's terrifying. My parents called me. My dad was just about in tears. You know, just the thought that, I'm a single mom with my 2 kids in this house, and this man's been in my house several times.
I was totally shocked that it could be anyone from this congregation or anyone that I knew.
During the time that I have known Dennis, I can say that there is nothing in our conversations that would even tend to lead to these accusations.
He was a great scout leader. It's just as he got older and his kids got older and moved out, he just kind of gotten a little weird.
I think the biggest shock for Wichita was that he was just a regular guy, had a job, went to his work every day, had a family, had a wife, he had 2 kids, and he's a serial killer.
Everybody wanted an interview with Paula or Carrie or her brother. Everybody wanted that.
Of course, they're saying, how did you not know? How did they not know? And I remember being very, very protective of them, that they didn't know. None of us knew. He didn't just fool his family. He fooled a church. He fooled an entire city. He literally fooled everybody.
That first weekend, after my father was arrested, my mom was not well at all. She was in shock. I was in shock. My grandparents were there. My cousins were there. My aunt ran out and got Kentucky Fried Chicken, with all the fixings. And we all just sat around and ate. And to me, it felt like being at a funeral. And you're just sitting down and you're just having a meal. And even in that moment, you're laughing a little bit or you're crying at the same time. You're sharing stories, and my mom said really quickly then, she goes, it feels like your father has died and that we're gathered here after his funeral. And I said, yeah, I know, Mom. And then my mom, the first night, she was crying and she wanted me to sleep in her bed. And I was I couldn't handle it. It was too much. I was still shaking and still completely severed. And it was too much. I could not. And literally had to leave my mom alone. I just, it was too much. I just couldn't do it. The relationship with my mother is not existent at this moment. It is estranged. We were good growing up and good after the arrest, but I toed the line. You don't talk about it. You just pull yourself up and go to work. You don't tell people. I mean, I'm the only one that's public of my family. I don't know. It's frustrating as hell because, like, Dad is still alive. He's still my father, right? So for my mom, she can divorce him. She can cut him off. She has that power. Separate her life. Try to move on. For me and my brother, we don't have that. He's always my dad, right? I look like him. So for me, I never thought of my dad as dead. Early on, the pastor said he thought it would help if we would write my dad and say what we needed to say. So I started writing letters to my father in March of '05. Dad, hello, I am physically doing okay. I am safe and home in Michigan. The media was reporting I turned you in. That's not true. I didn't know anything like everyone else until the FBI knocked on my door. I tried to tell them what a great man you are, what a wonderful dad you are, how they totally had screwed up and arrested the wrong guy. I tried, we all did, but they didn't listen. We don't know who that other man is, but we love the husband and father and man we know with all our hearts. I was wondering if something happened to you as a boy and if you wanted to open up and talk about it. I'm so sorry if something did happen to you. You should know it's not your fault if something happened when you were little. Someday we would like answers if you're able to give them or have them yourself. I was trying to be really careful in my letter and not express anger, not express too much emotion, let him know I still loved him. He returned my letter March 26, 2005. Dear Carrie, happy belated Easter wish. Thank you so much for your letter. I was overjoyed with emotions and happiness. I was beginning to think no family members were going to write to me. Your letter was very sincere, and I can tell it came from a very loving and understanding daughter. Arraignment is in April 19th. We talked about a plea for insanity, but I don't know whether the state hospital or the prison will be the best in the long run. He was wavering back and forth, and we didn't understand what was going on. Like, you know what they have on you, you did it. Just, man up. It was frustrating, so frustrating. We didn't want to go through trial. But then in June of '05, my dad pled guilty, and that was the first time we had addressed it square in the face.
It's difficult to believe that this is the man who authorities say terrorized the city of Wichita, Kansas since 1974. But Rader is charged with 10 counts of murder in the cases that have come to be known as BTK.
In the courtroom, families of some of BTK's victims got their first real look at the man police believe killed their loved ones.
Please rise.
Dennis Rader's preliminary hearing was in June of 2005, and he pled guilty. And we go, okay, good. Now we can go home. No way. Dennis Rader went into detail of each murder.
I want you to tell me in your own words why you believe you're guilty. We will start off with count number 1.
I had never strangled anyone before, so I really didn't know how much pressure you had to put on a person or how long it would take. She was fighting, basically losing control. The strangulation wasn't working on her, and I used a knife on her. Got her a glass of water, comforted her a little bit, and then went ahead and tied her up, and then put a bag over her head and strangled her.
It was like this for 45 terrible minutes. 60-year-old Dennis Rader calmly, even clinically, detailing the 10 murders he says he committed.
We stayed away from court. We didn't want to be in there. We couldn't handle the media. We wanted the families to have that time in court. We didn't want to cause a disruption. We just really could not handle it. It was really, really hard to hear him take a guilty and hear it in his own words.
If you read much about serial killers, they go through what they call the different phases. That's one of the phases they go through as a trolling stage. You're looking for a victim at that time. But once you lock in on a certain person, then you become a stalking. And that might be several of them, but you really home in on that person. That's the victim.
All right. Is that correct? All of these incidents, these 10 counts, occurred because you wanted to satisfy a sexual fantasy. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. You may be seated, Mr. Rader.
That's Dennis Rader describing 10 brutal homicides like it was a job.
You're right. It was like it was just a job for him, and he was just going through the motions of his job.
My co-anchor and I were like, this is not happening. Can you imagine being his daughter or son or wife that day?
A lot of the stuff that came out, I disassociated from it. It was a disaster. I could not handle it. I just could not handle it.
All right. It promises to be an emotional few days in a Kansas courtroom. Formal sentencing gets underway this morning for serial killer Dennis Rader.
The proceedings have blanketed Wichita, a town of 350,000, where many have never known life without BTK.
The district attorney, Nola Folston, had every intention during that sentencing hearing to humiliate Dennis Rader to the nth degree.
What is that, sir?
This is a plastic mask.
Several search warrants were executed around the city of Wichita. Dennis Rader said, "You'll find the mother lode in my office. It's in my file cabinet." It was an unlocked file cabinet, so he felt obviously very secure in maintaining these things here. There was a lot of photography, pictures that he had taken over a span of time, and a lot of drawings. He had everything identified, dates, alphabetized, cross-referenced. There was a cross-reference so he could find stuff easily. He basically created kind of a worksheet of his projects.
These are devices that he took photos of.
When I was writing my dad told us worse stuff was coming, and I was like, what could be worse than murder?
There are more of these?
He's had hundreds, if not thousands.
The district attorney showed pictures of Dennis Rader with nylon stocking over his own head, and she wanted to show the world what a sick human being this was.
All of a sudden, it's coming out about my dad in bondage and naked in my grandparents' basement, dressed up in victims' clothing. And it's just like a never-ending show of hell.
The prosecutors are laying out the horrifying details. Some of the victims' families are right there in court reliving the nightmare, and today those families will get to confront Rader himself.
Despite Dennis Rader's efforts to destroy my family, we survive, stronger and closer now more than ever. Our love for each other was forged with pain and loss. As far as I'm concerned, when it is all done, Dennis Rader has failed in his effort to kill the Oteros.
Although we have never met, you have seen my face before. It is the same face you murdered over 30 years ago. The face of my mother, Julie Otero.
The pain and suffering that he's caused our family and the loss of such a beautiful young lady of 21, he's got to go on and live his life 31 years now with raising a family and children.
I cannot begin to explain to you. There are not words to make you understand what losing Nancy has meant to me and my family. I lost a friend, a confidant. My children will never have an aunt, and I'll never have another sister.
It's been almost 19 years now that my brother and I had the most important woman in our lives taken from us. It's not fair that we had so little time with her.
I would only ask that the court provide the maximum sentence allowed by law to this monster.
I haven't prepared for this statement, but I'd just like for him to suffer for the rest of his life. And so.
Speaking for my mother with us in spirit, for my own family, and I hope for the entire family of survivors here today, we dedicate this day to the memories of those who cannot be with us. Today, we will each silently remember a father, a brother, a wife, a mother, a sister, a daughter, a grandmother. While you agonize over the reality that your last victims were ironically your own family, we will embrace the new family we now have, with whom we will always share a common bond forged from the pain of adversity and loss.
The victims' families were incredible. When the judge gave Dennis Rader a chance to talk, they did not want to make Dennis Rader feel like he won.
Mr. Rader, do you desire to say anything on your own behalf in mitigation of punishment?
And so the victims' families walked out of the courtroom.
Your Honor, Sedgwick County, victims, I do realize that the crimes have committed. Can you? Okay.
After the victim's statements, they let him talk. He's now got a shot to apologize or say something meaningful or, say that he regretted everything. And instead he gets up and he thanks everybody. So he thanks the police, he thanks the DA, he thanks the victims' families, he thanks the judge. It's like the most bizarre thing.
Mr. Rader, would you please stand? Sir, based upon your plea, which occurred on the 27th day of June, 2005, before this court, I once again judge you guilty.
The judge sentenced him to 175 years in prison, and that is the last time the man has been outside of walls. After my dad was arrested, I hadn't talked about any of this stuff. I hadn't addressed any of it for like 10 years almost. When people were like, tell me about your life or your father, just in casual conversation, I would say I'm estranged from my father, or at the most, I would say my dad is in jail. I was following the Midwest Code, don't talk about the bad things. And then that night I found out about Stephen King. When that reporter called me from the Eagle, it was like the first time somebody had given me permission to just talk, to just let it out. And as soon as somebody said, no, it's okay, you can talk about it, it was like it got out of me. And then I started healing. In 2015, I started learning how to write. It took me 4 years to write my first book. And then it became a national bestseller in 2019.
You are an incredibly courageous person for writing this, for getting out there.
I've been through hell and I'm still here, so my message is hold on, hope's just around the corner, don't ever give up. When I'm sitting here, I'm surrounded by stuff like my dad, like photos of my dad, my book with my dad. I mean, a lot of who I am now and my identity is unfortunately wrapped into my father. I've had some problems on Facebook, and I've had people email me and Instagram message me, text me, stalk me, threaten to kill me, say things like they wish my dad had left an 11th victim, which is me. My trauma therapist said recently, what would happen if you just walked away from all of this? And I said, it would be peaceful, but like my reality is my career is now tied into all of this.
If you look at this and look at that, that's, this pertains to an unsolved homicide. That's why I wanted to visit with him about that.
26-year-old mother who disappeared Saturday while out to dry her laundry may have fallen victim to foul play. Denise Rathburn, 25, and left her home between 3 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. Saturday, pushing a baby carriage full of wet laundry. She did not return.
Are you familiar with this area?
We used to drive bikes over there. We would ride bikes over there, so we can go look at all of that. We had to sit down. I got in my dad's records. He had these little spiral notebooks, and he would recreate notes and his projects, which are like stalkings and sometimes murders and breakings and enterings. He's got like at least 70 or 80 of them. And they just let me go. Like, that stuff had been in existence in evidence since '05, but nobody had ever let me in, right?
Specific location things where we can actually drive and physically look.
I'm reading through my dad's notes, and he has a notation 81 for the year 1981. I would have been 2, 3. In all caps, he has carry/B&D, which is bondage/game. And I see that, and I'm like, what the holy crap? And then there's another one right after that says kids/bath/S, and that's for sex for my dad. So I'm like, did dad molest me in the bath when I was like 3? And why is my name on a bondage game? And so I am like just full spinning at this point, really, really confused. Maybe dad had been practicing in my room. Was he practicing on me? I have night terrors and issues in my bedroom growing up. Part of that night terror stuff, wetting the bed, scared of the dark, terrified in my bed, had to do with something with like a bad man in the house. But it was like a home invasion thing. That's what he did to victims. I never knew where that came from. I think my subconscious was trying to get it out of me since I was a little girl. Saying, hey, there's a bad man in my house.
Seeing my name in his own handwriting in his project notes, it's just a lot. The only person talking to me really, or the only people talking to me is Osage County. So of course I'm gonna get pulled into their narratives, right? We're trying to figure out, did he do any more? I don't know if he did any more. Everybody and their dog wants a piece of me. Can we write your dad? Can you get us into your dad? There's very few people I can trust at this point that just want to get to know me, because it's all around my dad. And then I get trolled on Twitter and people are like, you're nothing without your dad. Like, you have no life and no career. So I'm upset today, like frustrated and angry and sad and wanting to give up and just run away.
I was feeling really bad about all of this. And my therapist said, you know what, law enforcement's just looking into things and they're asking questions, and that's okay. Like, that's their job, it's okay. And that it really helps me when somebody says it's okay. They asked for me to go in and see my dad in prison to find out, did he commit any more crimes? Are there any more murders? If my father has committed more murders, then we really do need to get to the bottom of the truth, and we need to get to it before my father passes away. They could tell I was anxious. I mean, I hadn't seen him for 18 and a half years, but they're not getting in to see my father without me. So, no, I was not done with Dad. I had worked for days for things to talk to my dad about. Law enforcement was with me. They said, you can't bring this sexual abuse up. It's going to cause him to shut down. When we got to the prison, you have to go by like this inner watchtower, and you go through a series of like locked doors. And I go in with 2 investigators, a male and a female. You know, he's frail, he's in a wheelchair, and he was literally like crying, so happy to see me, like just over the moon to get to see his kid. He's only like 3 or 4 feet across from me at a table. And then I'm in there for a couple, 2-3 hours, asking him questions and about everything that's going on. I said, there's missing women. There's these cases that look like they could be you. You know, they match your MO, or they're close enough to it, or time frames. And he goes, what are you talking about? And he said, can't we just reminisce? Can't we just have a father-daughter? Can't we just have memories? And I was like, Dad, that's not why I'm here. He's dodging things, saying he's forgetting things, but then he's just really sharp memory. Deny. He's completely innocent, that he's a saint, other than for all the other things he did. And he said, oh, you know, it was just a 10. And he turned on a dime. He was angry about the investigation. He was angry about the media. He thought things were wrapping up. You know, he was just angry. So I shouldn't have done this. I ended up asking my dad about the notation in his journal. I said, Dad, what does Carrie Bondage Gay mean? And my dad goes, oh, that was just a fantasy. I never touched the family. He goes, you're just making stuff up about me now to be like famous. My PTSD just went, everything closed in. I couldn't see, I couldn't think. And I was like, that's it, I'm done, I don't care. And it was just like a blast of like 45 years of anger and everything at my dad. I'm just like completely off script. And I just nail him about everything, about Mrs. Hedge, the pine needles, about being 6, him putting me in the back of that Oldsmobile that later he put Mrs. Davis's body in. I'm just nailing him with all this stuff that had been inside me. It's just a big, huge ball of trauma, and I'm just ramming him with it. It was like I was back in my house with that man coming home, walking in that door, and you didn't know who was coming home. Is Dad coming home? Is angry man coming home? I was upset, and he's like, Carrie, you brought this on yourself? And he was literally like gaslighting me, manipulating me, lying to me 5 feet from me. It was like I wasn't even talking to my dad. It was like I was talking to like a subhuman. And so when everybody talks about him being a psychopath and a narcissist and not wanting to be around him, I had still been able to find humanity in him, and then I wasn't able to. I don't ever want to go anywhere near that person again. That's not my dad. I don't know who that is. I'll grieve those memories and that girl and that family. I lost all of it. But I just didn't really want to give him any of me anymore. And I really didn't want any of it in my life. I started building space between me and this really nastiness right over here in my father. It was a decision to separate myself from, vileness.
How many years has it been since? What is that? Since high school? 96.
I can't math.
I can't either.
20. I know. I remember it's been like 25 since I've seen Carrie.
No! 27 since high school and 26 since our freshman year. Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. Because then you add that to like how old you were, and you're like, no.
You didn't make it to the reunion.
Oh God, I'm not going to no reunion. Are you kidding me? They would be like, what was it like growing up with him? Or you look like him. You guys know my mom. I look like my mom.
Right,
Like
that's
mom.
what I would
and
have
nobody
said.
knows what my mom looks like. So I'm
Right.
like, guys, I look like my mom. Stop it.
Anybody that knows me before Dad's arrest know me as Carrie and my family that way, right? And they respect that. Andrea, I've known her since kindergarten. Rita, I've known since middle school. They still just see me as who I am.
I was talking to my husband the other day, and I said, at the end of the day, what I wish for Carrie is that you find peace, but able to live your life without this black cloud.
You deserve it.
Yeah, you do.
You absolutely do.
I know.
I've learned to build boundaries. I've learned to speak up. I've become a public figure to, advocate for crime victims and trauma victims and survivors and lend my voice, not just for people that have been through what I have, but families like mine and, other victims. I'm just going to keep trying to use my voice and speak up, advocate for other families when needed. Every freaking headline for the last 10 years has said, BTK's daughter, BTK's daughter. And one got it right and said, Carrie Rawson, daughter of Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. I want to be identified like Carrie Rawson. On a bigger level, I guess that's how I'm identified, but I'm so much more than that.
Good girl. That's a good girl.
I'm a mom, so I spend time with my kids and we go to the beach. I like to read and watch TV and like anybody and just chill out. So I'm just a normal person. And most days, I don't even really think about who my dad is. I don't think about him.
Come on, let's go get a drink. Good girl.
I'm just me.
It all starts in Riverdale, Georgia, a prosperous suburban town, a very popular place among young people attending Atlanta universities. Many students live in Clayton County, particularly in Riverdale. There are many low-cost apartments available for rent. The whole town welcomes them with open arms during the important transition from high school to college. It was a fairly quiet town until July 8th, 2006. On that day, a mother called the Clayton police. She was worried about her son, a student living in Riverdale. Peggy Walker,
Carnell's mother. Walker contacted the emergency services to ask them to check on her son. It is common practice to call the police to check on the well-being of a loved one when you haven't heard from them.
It was his mother's birthday, and they were very close. As she had promised to visit him, or at least give him a call. But he hadn't been in touch, and she was starting to worry.
The police took the mother's call seriously and went straight to the house.
I went to the scene and saw that the front door of the house was closed, as was the garage door. So I walked around and saw that the back door was open.
When we entered the garage, an unbearable smell hit our noses. I looked in the trunk of the vehicle and saw a human being.
And he had.
In his underwear. It was clear that the individual had been in the trunk for quite some time.
The body was already showing signs of bloating, indicating that he had been there for at least a few days.
Based on initial observations, Carl Neal's body may have been in the trunk for nearly 3 weeks.
Forensic experts were dispatched to the scene. They made their initial findings and confirmed that the body was that of young student Carl Neal Walker. They estimate the date of death to be around June 19.
For Peggy, his mother, the shock was terrible.
Carl Neal Walker.
Carnell Walker was a young man full of life. Charismatic and sociable. He was much loved. He was an excellent tennis player who worked alongside his studies and was trying to launch a music label. He was the kind of person whose good humor was contagious.
So who could have wanted to harm this unassuming student? Investigators are looking for answers by examining the victim's body.
We found that his hands were tied with USB cables and electrical tape on parts of his skull, and we saw that his hair had been cut. He had dreadlocks.
Some of his limbs had been punctured, particularly his thighs and hands. The violent cause of death was undeniable. Based on our observations, the individual had been subjected to a long period of torture.
Investigators transferred the body to the morgue, hoping that the autopsy performed by the medical examiner would reveal the exact cause of death. Then they continued to search the victim's home and made a discovery that could well advance the investigation.
The first thing I noticed was the dreadlocks. There was a huge pile of hair on the floor.
Someone had cut off most of the victim's dreadlocks. There were also credit cards on the kitchen table. That's about it.
The living room furniture had been ransacked.
In the bathroom, we found a bloody footprint on the toilet bowl.
Based on this footprint, someone who had stepped in a pool of blood had climbed onto the toilet bowl. But why?
It was in the bedroom that we saw the most signs of a struggle. The dresser drawers had been torn out, the mattress was upside down, and belongings were scattered all over the floor.
Given the damage in the bedroom and the abuse suffered by the victim, it was clear that someone had come looking for something. I immediately had the impression that this was not the work of a single attacker. In particular, I noticed a pair of jeans stained with blood and a claw hammer, also covered in blood from top to bottom. Generally, people don't try to kill someone with a hammer.
As they continued to examine the different rooms, the police made another discovery.
While searching the house, I found a letter from an insurance company indicating that Carl Neal Walker had been involved in an accident. The case was still ongoing, but it was impossible to know what kind of accident it was. We also found two other letters. The first was threatening. It ordered Mr. Walker to pay his rent and lock up the house. The other letter had not been touched. It was lying there on the sofa. I found it strange that in a house that had been turned upside down, no one had touched this letter.
The investigators looked at the letter and discovered that it was an eviction notice. They quickly realized that both letters were signed by the same person, Terry Alexander.
We had confirmation that the owner of the apartment rented by Carl Neal Walker was indeed Mr. Terry Alexander?
It appeared that his relationship with his tenant had deteriorated and that he had decided to terminate his lease.
In the minds of the investigators, an idea began to take shape. What if Terry Alexander, the owner of the victim's house, was connected to the murder? They decided to summon him for questioning. When he arrived at the station, the man confirmed that his relationship with Carl Neal had been very tense.
Terry Carlisle Walker rented this house from Terry Alexander. The latter had the keys to the house. The owner and the 23-year-old man were in conflict over unpaid rent and housekeeping.
When Carl Neal stopped paying rent and electricity bills, things got worse. Until, as Terry Alexander confirmed to us, eviction proceedings were initiated.
However, Terry Alexander, the landlord, insists he had nothing to do with his tenant's murder. The police asked him if he had visited the student's home after June 19th, the estimated date of death, and his answer proved disturbing.
Mr. Alexander confirmed to us that he had indeed entered the house after June 19th, 2006. He had left the eviction notice exactly where we found it on the sofa. He stated that he simply left afterwards. I found it quite surprising that he did not notice the damage and above all the bloodstains on the walls. How could he not have seen them?
How can you come in, leave a letter, and not try to understand what might have happened? Especially when it's your own house? Anyone would have wanted to know why it was in that state. It all seemed very strange to me. I immediately thought he was hiding something from us.
In the eyes of the police, the owner's statements are not convincing. He therefore decided to confront him with the physical evidence found at the crime scene. He asked the owners to leave his shoes with them. These shoes were then analyzed by the forensic team.
The blood had left footprints throughout the house, so he had to put his shoes back on to compare them with the footprints found at the crime scene. Was he really innocent? Or was he hiding something more serious? In the end, with no convincing evidence, he more or less lost his status as a suspect in the case.
At this stage of the investigation, I found it difficult to imagine a motive for him. Admittedly, he wanted Carl Nell to leave his house. But why trash his own house in the process? No one would ransack their property before leaving a dead body there for weeks. It makes no sense. So we removed him from the list of suspects. Unfortunately, after clearing Mr. Alexander, the investigation quickly ran out of steam.
Just a few days after the body was discovered, the investigation was going round in circles and had reached a dead end. The police then had the idea of calling on the press to publicize the case. Perhaps someone could provide them with information about what had happened. And this strategy would prove successful.
A young woman called us. She seemed upset. She immediately stated that she knew who had killed Carl Neal Walker and why.
For the first time since the gruesome discovery, the police seemed to have a serious lead. But the young woman, who claims to know the culprit, is afraid to talk and, above all, afraid of suffering the same fate as the victim.
This informant wanted us to protect her. She was terrified. She even refused to sign a written statement. We finally managed to convince her to come and see us. She seemed scared to death, because she was absolutely certain she knew the identity of Karen Walker's murderer. She worked with the victim for a cleaning company. He cleaned private homes in the Atlanta area. At the end of a contract, Arnold had been accused of stealing jewelry. The person whose jewelry had disappeared was from the same family as the manager of the cleaning company. And according to this informant, the boss had said that he was going to kill Carl Neal Walker and that his body would be found in a car trunk.
This was an incredible coincidence, as Carnell's body was indeed found in a trunk. The investigators must therefore question this individual.
She gave us a name, that of a certain Harry Baum. According to her, he was from New York and worked for the mafia. She was very afraid that Bao would kill her in turn, or that he would send a hitman after her.
Given the suspect's profile, the police are wondering whether he or his henchmen might have carried out their threat.
Of course, I immediately wanted to talk to this Mr.
The police summoned him to ask him a few questions. But while the suspect is waiting for the investigators, alone in the interrogation room, he behaves strangely.
We noticed that he was humming a rap song about being pursued by the police. When we entered, he immediately asked to speak to his lawyer, and in that case, we can no longer question the suspect.
Harry Baum remained silent. The investigators therefore had to find more tangible evidence to corroborate their informant's testimony.
I knew that in order to move forward, I needed concrete clues. The starting point was that bloody footprint on the toilet bowl. If I could prove that Harry Baum had worn his shoes, I might be able to nail him. We searched his home and took all his sneakers, which we then sent to the lab for DNA analysis. We hope to find traces of the blood found at Carl Neil Walker's house on one of the soles. On the toilet bowl.
While waiting for the results from the crime lab, the police combed through the suspect's phone records. The aim of the operation was to find out if his cell phone had been used near the student's home on the day of the murder.
The phone records never placed him in the vicinity of the victim's home. And I was unable to establish any concrete link between Mr. Baum and the Mafia. Although he acted like a tough guy, it was just a facade, as there was nothing to link him to organized crime.
Furthermore, forensic analysis of the shoes exonerates the suspect.
No concrete evidence came out of the analysis. Nothing linked Harry Baum to the murder.
For the police, this was yet another failure. They therefore refocused their investigation on the victim's personality, as Nell was a young man of his time who was very active on the internet. They decided to comb through his social media accounts in the hope that a detail they had overlooked would provide them with a lead.
The star platform for young people was MySpace.com. Carl Neil Walker was involved in hip-hop, so he was naturally present on the network. He produced music and recorded his rapper friends' tracks on his personal computer. He then posted everything online under the pseudonym Semini.
His rap persona was in line with the major stereotypes of the time. Impetuous, boastful, obsessed with money despite his status as a broke student. He wanted to be flashy on MySpace.
On that site, you could indicate your income, and she publicly claimed that they earned between $75,000 and $100,000 per year.
A new scenario began to take shape in the investigators' minds. What if the student who pretended to be a famous and wealthy rapper had made enemies? What if these killers were actually individuals who wanted to steal his money?
For us, it was a convincing motive. He posted photos of himself with large sums of cash. He publicly claimed to have a very comfortable income. Enough, in any case, to make some ill-intentioned individuals want to steal from him on the internet.
Carnell presents himself as a producer rolling in money, earning up to $100,000 a year.
We determined that this was far from the case, according to his bank. Carl Neil Walker had only $20 in his account.
The penniless student was by no means a wealthy music industry producer. As police officers try to find out more about the young man, they receive a call from an insurance lawyer.
I received a call from a lawyer. This lawyer explained that he had heard about the case on TV and was contacting me because he had worked on Carl Neal Walker's accident case in March.
That same year, Carl Neal Walker had been involved in a car accident. According to our information, he had only been slightly injured, but it was enough to file a complaint.
Indeed, a letter from the insurance company had been found by the police at the victim's home. And importantly, the compensation could have been as high as $50,000.
This amount was perfectly in line with Simone's character, as Neal began telling people that he had $50,000.
But on social media, because he forgot to mention one crucial detail, the money was still not in his account. Worse still, in reality, he wasn't even sure he would receive the money.
The sad reality was that he hadn't received anything yet, and the legal proceedings were far from over. All this bluster was very misplaced. It was all fake.
On the other hand, it's possible that these killers believed he had found the goose that lays the golden eggs. And to get their share of the supposed loot, they would not have hesitated to go to the student's house and torture him.
Walker Carolyn. Walker suffered numerous acts of barbarism that night, and perhaps even the next day. But that's not what killed her.
The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was hyperthermia. While locked in the trunk of a car in the middle of somewhere in Atlanta, he couldn't hold out for long. Or the people who subjected her to these barbaric acts were necessarily very violent individuals.
For investigators, there is a way to track down these murderers. If they imagined that the victim had that much money, it was because they were bound to be subscribed to Carla's MySpace page. Is she the key to the mystery? He is surely on social media. We shared a message on Carl Nell's MySpace page in an attempt to obtain information that could lead to his killers. And the police's plan worked. On July 19th, investigators received a call from the Morehouse University Police.
A university employee put us on the trail of a young man who was apparently involved in the murder of Carl Neal Walker.
That young man was Brian Garland.
This woman worked in the cafeteria. One evening, she received a phone call from Brian Garland, who was a friend of hers. He wanted to talk to her. They then went for a drive together in the southern suburbs of Atlanta. And he explained to her that he had been present when Karen Walker was killed. He also named other students who had allegedly participated in the murders.
Brennan Garland was also a student at Morehouse. According to our information, he was a fairly good student. He was in his senior year studying psychology and had 3 part-time jobs, including one on campus. It was through this part-time job that he had met this woman. His parents were very respectable people, and it seemed almost far-fetched to see him associated with a crime as barbaric as Karen's.
However, the police would soon discover the suspect's hidden side. Behind his well-behaved student exterior lay a completely different personality.
Brian Garland 4. To all his friends in Atlanta, Brian Garland was a real tough guy because he came from California. He valued his reputation as a gang member. I can't explain why, but many of these young men invent a life for themselves because they are attracted to the image and style of the gangster.
Lifestyle.
And they often realize too late that this lifestyle leads to a dead end.
Inside.
We immediately began monitoring Brian Garland. One night while we were parked near his home, I saw him walking past us. I told him who I was and asked him to come talk to me about Carl Walker's death.
Walker, stay. Here.
He immediately told me he feared for his safety. Yes, the others would find out that he had spoken. They would kill him in turn.
But who are these individuals who are terrorizing witnesses to the crime in an attempt to learn more? Brian Garland is taken to the station for questioning.
During his interrogation, Brian Garland begins by telling a fairly mundane story. His friend and classmate Michael Allen calls him and suggests they go for a drive. Brian has a car, so he picks up Miles. Their plan is to buy some weed and then go smoke it at Carl Walker's house. Brian, on the way, he picks up two other friends. The first is Keith Robert, also a student at Morehouse College, and the second is known only by his first name, Raheem. When they arrive at Carlin Walker's house, Brennan is surprised to see Miles Allen picking the lock to get into the house. It is at this moment that he realizes that something he hadn't suspected may be going on.
Once inside the house, he improvises a plan. As soon as Carnell returns, they will beat him up. Keith Robert had fallen out with Carnell Walker. He told anyone who would listen that Carnell had disrespected him. In addition, everyone had heard that the famous car accident had earned him a nice little windfall. So they decided to steal his insurance money. Brian Garland then told us that he wasn't comfortable and wanted to leave the premises, but having seen what he thought was a weapon in Keith Robert's belt, he preferred to stay so as not to take any risks. So they all waited for the return of Carnell.
When?
According to his testimony, as soon as Carl returned, Nell, Miles Allen, and Raheem violently beat him until he was unconscious. They then drugged him and tied him to a chair. When he woke up, they questioned him to find out where he was hiding the money they believed he had. Keith Roberts threatened to cut off his dreadlocks if he didn't tell them where the money was. Carl Neil Walker begged them, "What are you talking about? I don't have any money." And he did true. So Roberts cut his dreadlocks one by one. And the torture continued for a long time. During his interrogation, Brian Garland initially presented himself as a mere observer of the scene. But he eventually admitted that he had also participated in the torture. He attempted to mitigate his responsibility by arguing that if he did not participate, he risked suffering the same fate.
Brian Garland told us that he returned alone shortly before dawn around 6 a.m.
Brian Garland told us that he returned alone shortly before dawn around 6 a.m. He opened the trunk and heard nothing at all. No breathing. No murmurs, no sign of life. He then touched Carnell's leg, who, according to him, was cold. He then became frightened and fled through the back door, leaving it wide open.
After After his confession, investigators immediately placed Brian Garland in custody and set out to track down the other attackers. But then came a dramatic turn of events. Upon learning that he was wanted, Miss Allen turned himself into the police station.
He played the same tune as Garland, accusing the others of being responsible. Unfortunately, he still bore traces of physical injuries, notably cuts on his hands, proving that he had indeed participated in the assault, tobacco, and torture of Karen Walker.
In addition, evidence will also confirm Mrs. presence at the scene of the crime, such as the bloody handprint found on the wall, which matches hers in every detail. With the second member of the gang now behind bars, investigators are turning their attention to the third man, Keith Roberts.
He made only one statement: it was God's will, and I will answer only to God. That's all he said.
But his silence in custody did not protect him, and the police managed to find physical evidence linking him directly to the crime scene.
We had physical proof that Kit Roberts was there, thanks to the fingerprint he left on the oil lamp.
Investigators now have to arrest the last suspect, Rahim Mohammed, whose real name is Theodore Soliman. They soon discover that he has a long criminal record and has fled to Chicago. But Theodore is quickly located and arrested.
We know that these four men broke into Carlisle Walker's home. They attacked him, then tied him to a chair.
The young man fought back to survive. He fought back, but there were too many.
They tied him up, tortured him, and locked him in the trunk of a car.
Theodore Soliman pleads guilty to murder. He is sentenced to life in prison. Kit Roberts, Miss Allen, and Brian Garland pleaded not guilty, but only Bragelonne was acquitted.
Brennan Garland was completely acquitted. I respect the jury's decision, but based on what I have read and having presided over all three trials, I am convinced that he was not merely an active participant. But he was one of the masterminds behind the operation. Smarter than the others, he managed to get away with it.
The other two defendants did not fare so well. Considered the mastermind of the operation, Robert Kitt was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Miss Allen was also sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 70 years.
I often think of Peggy, Carlisle's mother. I've never forgotten her. She grew up in a very disadvantaged family. Her life was difficult. She was especially proud to see her son go to college. But he tragically disappeared before he could fulfill his destiny. For her, it must have been a terrible blow.
Samuel Little's criminal journey began in 1970. For several decades, he has killed 100 women without ever being really worried. How could he have gone under the radar of the police for so long? In 2018, a Texas Ranger, James Holland, managed to make him talk. More than 700 hours of interviews to bring to light an extraordinary murderous madness. And a rather unusual hidden talent. In his cell, Samuel Little paints the portrait of all his victims. Hence his nickname, the Picasso of crime. What is one of the most incredible serial killer cases begins in July 1987 in Los Angeles, California. The police discover the body of a woman in a vacant lot in the middle of the garbage. She was raped and strangled. September 1987, just 2 months later, a new young woman was found murdered. This time, the victim was dismembered and the parts of her body were scattered on the edge of a bush. 2 years later, another wild murder. The body was found in an alley. She was whipped and strangled. 3 murders, 3 wildly murdered women, in less than 2 years, in the lowlands of Los Angeles. This is the beginning of an extraordinary investigation that will traumatize America as a whole, and that will allow to arrest the one who could well be the worst serial killer in the history of the United States. August 1989, in the premises of the Los Angeles police. After the discovery of this third body, the police are on their toes. They have noted disturbing similarities with the 2 previous murders of young women. 3 times, women's bodies will be found scattered throughout the city. Of these 3 different facts, the one that will really present itself as the most shocking for the investigators. This is the one where there is a dismemberment. The scene is quite terrible because the body is terribly mutilated and very damaged. That is to say that it is a woman who died under the blows. So it's a horror show, like a crime scene, on which the Los Angeles Police Department works, the famous LAPD. And from there is a joint investigation group which is dedicated to these 3 cases of murder of young women which look pretty much identical. What if the 3 young women had been victims of the same killer? The investigators are convinced of this because the operating mode and the profile of the victims have strange similarities. The Los Angeles police say there is a common point between these 3 crimes. First, the origin of these women, not the ethnic origin, but the origin because they are, for the most part, prostitutes or people who are on the margins of society. Then there is the operating mode. That is to say that they are systematically raped, then strangled the same way. For the police, no doubt, a new serial killer is quickly arriving in Los Angeles. The news has the effect of a bomb. You have to know that we are in the 80s in Los Angeles and it's been 15 years since the country has been prey to a real wave of serial killers. So inevitably the rapprochement is made. And there is a real psychosis that settles in the whole region because we fear that a new serial killer is hitting us. Because we have quite common behaviors between the facts. We have a lot of violence, we have a lot of control over the victims. Without apparent motive, their body was abandoned without concealment. And so the Los Angeles police say to themselves, it is possible that we are dealing with a serial killer. It remains to identify this serial killer. To unmask him, the police have a cutting edge, DNA traces found on the spot. All samples are sent to the scientific police. But when the results fall, it is disappointment. No clue matches. The police are in a dead end, the case is put aside. It is not completely classified, let's say it is stored, waiting for a new element that would reactivate it and investigate again. Because we say to ourselves, in a few years, we will probably have the opportunity to do something about it. This is the practice of cold cases, well known in the United States. We cannot solve the problem now, but maybe in a year, 2 years, or 10 years, future police officers will be able to reach their end. And so these 3 files join the already voluminous pile of unsolved cases in California. The murders of Carol Elford, Guadalupe Abadica, and Audrey Nelson remain unanswered. And it will take 23 years for the investigation to know an incredible twist that no one expected. In 2012, we are in Kentucky, that is, almost in the middle of nowhere, and a homeless man, an old man, a 72-year-old man, is reported. Obviously addicted to crack, which is a drug, which is really the drug of the poor. This rather quiet homeless man would be mixed up in a traffic of stupefying. He was reported to the police for possession and use of drugs in the home of his family. And so the local police, as they sometimes do, comes to arrest this man. His name is Samuel Little. He is almost 70 years old. He is not really someone of early youth, but he is still quite a gallant person. He is completely on the edge of society. We don't really know where he comes from, and we don't really know who he is. Samuel Little opposes no resistance. It must be said that for a small drug case, he does not risk much. But everything is not going to go as planned. A classic investigation is set up for this type of infraction. He is placed in custody. Drafts are made, fingerprints, DNA in a very classic way compared to what is done. And this DNA taken from this SDF is then poured on the basis of data from the Central American dossier. And there, bingo, as they say, it matches. It matches on what case? In fact, it matches on the cases of the 3 young girls who had been found murdered in Los Angeles, on the other side of the country, almost at the end of the 80s. It's pretty incredible, so long after. "23 years later, the case of the 3 young prostitutes murdered is relaunched. And if the relentless serial killer wanted at the end of the 80s was actually this old man? The Kentucky police immediately warns his colleagues in Los Angeles. And without further ado, Samuel Little is extradited to California. In fact, he's a little bit at the end of the rope. Barely arrived in Los Angeles, the old man is questioned by the police. Samuel Little, as an investigator, is very cold, very sure of himself, rejects any involvement. He does not want to discuss, he does not want to be approached. He is very closed and very difficult to establish a dialogue and contact with him. Forced to find that he falls on a wall because Samuel Little, as weak as he is, screams his innocence. In fact, he says that he has absolutely nothing to do with these crimes that go back more than 20 years, that he never came to these places in Los Angeles, and that he has no reason to be in custody at that moment. Little camps on his positions and locks himself in silence. In fact, very quickly, the police no longer doubt Little's guilt in this case. DNA has been verified. It is certain, in reality, that Little is the murderer, but they do not want to go to trial without obtaining confessions. This is still extremely important at this time. Confessions are needed. And they don't have any, because Little is the thief by nature. 2 years later, Samuel Little appears before the grand jury for the 3 murders committed at the end of the 80s. He runs the prison alive and he still claims his innocence. But he does not convince the jurors. DNA samples are enough to sentence him to life without possibility of release. The septuagenarian is therefore officially recognized guilty of the 3 murders. But for the police, there is still a shadow area on the case of Samuel Little. There is a question that arises. The last crime dates from 1989. Samuel Little was arrested 20 years later. What happened during these 20 years? Is it conceivable that a man who killed 3 times in the space of 2 years does not kill once during the next 20 years? And there is another person who asks this question. She is in Quantico, at the headquarters of the FBI, and is interested in the case of Samuel Little. It's Christina Palazzolo. In fact, she is an investigator. She is a bit of a new generation and who is interested in the course of serial killers. So she is a little specialized in cold cases and itinerant killers. And so she takes a little bit of passion for this case of Samuel Little, which, according to her, could reveal other secrets. Christina Palazzolo is what is called in the United States a profiler. She depends on the FBI's Department of Criminology. Her job is to look for common points between different murders to solve cold cases. And for that, she is helped by a computer software, the VCAP, a program that she will use in the case of Samuel Little. and the VCAP software is able to make calculations. So not only with DNA, but also with the operating mode, with the victim's personality. And so this somewhat revolutionary software will release information, capital information. It is that the name of Samuel Little could be associated with a crime committed in 1994. So in this famous period between the crimes of California and his arrest, and Texas, in a city called Odessa. This is the murder of Denise Christie Brothers. Carried missing for a month, she was later found dead in a ditch. It is a woman who was killed in conditions similar to the crimes of Los Angeles. She does not have exactly the same profile, but there is strangulation. There is also abandonment on the side of a road. And investigators say it may be interesting to question Samuel Little on the Odessa case dating from 1994. For Christina Palazzolo, the similarities in the operating mode between the Odessa murder and the crimes of Los Angeles are disturbing. According to the profiler, Little could well be the author of this fourth murder. But this time, there is no DNA evidence to confuse him. So there is no choice. We will have to succeed in making the suspect speak. Christina Palazzolo has an intuition. It is that to get to the end of this case, it will be necessary, at some point, to go through confessions. And at that moment, this analyst heard about a Texan investigator, Commander Brunel DePan, head of the Department of Behavioral Sciences at the PGGM, who had good results in terms of hearing and who obviously easily establishes contact with the suspects. The FBI profiler has already met this 40-year-old. And above all, she knows his reputation, that of an experienced police officer capable of passing on confessions, even to the most hardened criminals. So she bets to entrust him with this delicate mission. There is not at all the same profile as her. His name is James Olan. He has a bit of the look of a cowboy. He always has a Stetson on his head. He looks more like a Western, I would say, than a police series on the FBI. James Olan is a Texas Ranger who does not correspond at all to the FBI agent and his black and white suit. However, he is known to be able to enter the brains of criminals. He is a pure Texas Ranger, that is to say, he is a caricature. It's really this old-fashioned cop who is the sheriff and who will end up in California knocking on the door of a prison saying, "Well, I'm here to interrogate Little." On that day, James Olan arrives determined. He must make Little speak. As soon as he arrives, he questions him. But quickly, the interrogation fails. It's the culture shock. On the one hand, we have a convicted Asian criminal who has nothing to gain, nothing to lose, to meet an investigator. And on the other hand, we have this investigator who appears to Samuel Little as the opposite of everything he is. This great white American cowboy who comes to him and who wants to interrogate him. Well, his first reaction is a defensive and violent reaction. Samuel Little is not like the others. He has this coldness and this distance. He completely rejects James Olan's strategy. It's going to be a total disaster. Little will react in a rather violent way by saying, "Get this guy out of my cell." And Olan, from memory, will last an hour or two on this first interrogation. He gets nothing. James Olan lost the first round. The Texas Ranger, sure of himself, to whom no one resists, must now change tactics. To prepare for his next meeting, Olan wants to know who is hiding behind the killer. And so he decides to start over all of Samuel Little's biography from his childhood to the present day to see if there is a flaw in this journey. We really try to find the person's way of working. And depending on the strategy we're going to use, we're going to play on the weak side or rather on the strong side. From the moment on, we have a very good knowledge of the person. The investigator will therefore delve into the childhood of Samuel Little. And this life begins in 1940 in Georgia, in the southeast of the United States. Samuel Little knows everything except the life of the great American dream. In fact, he was born almost in prison. His mother was imprisoned at the time she gave birth. His mother is a prostitute, and so Little will hardly know her. He has no father. The only task he has in his life is his maternal grandmother, who will finally raise him. But the environment is extremely marginal, poor. He grows up between prostitution and ghettos and quickly becomes a delinquent, starting by stealing a bike and then participating in robberies. He will be incarcerated very early in a miner's house. He will go back and forth between his grandmother's house and the correctional facility until he is 15 or 16 years old, when he will finally not be chased, but almost, from his grandmother's house, and he will start a long, long miscarriage. At 20 years old, he is wandering in Lorraine's ghetto in Ohio. Samuel makes his weapons in the street, and this is where he is noticed. He lives from robbery, theft, fights. And the only thing that ultimately works best is his fists. Samuel Little has only one talent. Since adolescence, he does boxing. He has a real boxing talent. Little becomes a professional thief and a second-rate boxer. He plays clandestine matches in the underground of the ghetto with the key to easy money and, above all, the hope of becoming a professional. But this underground life does not take off. In the end, the failure of his sports career will probably put an end to all his illusions of getting out of his condition. In the end, he will get involved in delinquency and then in crime. At 35 years old, Samuel Little was arrested 26 times in more than 10 American states, which is still a good record compared to his age. And so, James Holland's main question is to say to himself, at what point was there a failure for Samuel Little to go from this path of itinerant little delinquents to that of criminals and maybe serial criminals? James Holland discovers that Samuel Little is above all a wounded child without family and without ties. For this second hearing, the Ranger will change strategy. He erases his authoritarian side, and he now plays the card of respect, almost friendship. When James Holland comes back to Samuel Little, he is aware that his mission is to obtain a climate of complicity, to create a bond of kindness that will allow Samuel Little to confide. James Holland focuses on small details that can change everything. For this new interrogation, he decides, for example, not to reach empty hands. James Holland comes with a pizza, and his favorite soda, which is very popular in the United States, is called Dr. Pepper. It's not as famous as Coca-Cola, but almost. And in fact, Samuel Little is a fan of Dr. Pepper. He brings it to him to tell him, "I recognize you as a human being." Without judgment, without disgust in relation to what he did, that's important too. And that's why he comes with that and establishes this real bond of trust. At first, they come back to a 1960 coup, a battle of 63 to 64. We go back like that, all the way, and Little lives. And as he lives, he is finally carried away in his confession to the one that will lead to new murders. For a month, James Holland thus multiplies the hearings. And Samuel Little, more and more confident, tells the police the story of his life. And then one morning, everything changes. Faced with the investigator, Little marks a time of silence. He rubs his face as if to make a comeback of old memories. He swallows a sip of soda, a slice of pizza. Holland feels that the moment is decisive. He turns on his camera. Samuel Little delivers his first confession after talking about his victims, and will end up talking about a murder. He will talk about it in a rather strange way. First, all of a sudden, he makes a leap in time. Now we are in 1996. We are no longer in California or Texas. We have changed states again. The investigator does not come back. Little admits, but against all odds, he does not speak of the fourth murder that occurred in Odessa, for which Holland came to question him. He mentions another crime, that of Melissa Thomas. He describes with great precision his encounter with Melissa Thomas. Melissa Thomas, who was a drug addict, he approached her in an extremely natural and simple way, without premeditation, but by asking her to do drugs with him. They met in a cemetery and followed a consensual sexual relationship. And at the time of the act, he caresses her neck. And there, she would say to him, at least that's what he says, "But why do you caress my neck like that? Are you a serial killer?" And in a more or less playful tone, which actually makes Samuel Little unhinge. That's always what he says. And that he drives her crazy, that at that moment he caresses the young woman's neck, that he strangles her, and that he abandons her body near the cemetery under a sink. Little tells the crime in the smallest detail. Holland pierced the killer's carapace. But he remains impassive. He does not change his strategy, especially since he is now convinced of it. Samuel Little has other murders to confess. It remains to be seen how many. What James Holland thinks about Little at that moment is as much the story of the crime that is taking place as the quasi-surgical precision of Little's memories. He has this detail that actually freezes the cop's blood. He says, "We were under a sink." He didn't even say under a tree. We are under a sink. He has an extraordinary precision, a memory. Little's memories seem intact. Holland continues to make him speak. And the killer continues to confess to new murders. Again and again. And always with incredible details. Now, the killer is on the move. He continues the revelations and he even details his operating mode. He explains that, in general, he spots his prey at the exit of a bar. He gets along with her in a sexual relationship against money or drugs, and he takes his future victim to his car. There, he throws himself on her. He rapes her, or sometimes he prefers to masturbate while he strangles her. Then he abandons his body along a road. For weeks, facing the Ranger Holland, Samuel Little confides in himself, and as he goes back in time, the list increases. 10, 20, 40, 60, 80. The number of victims never seems to stop. A question obsesses the investigator. How far will Little go? How did this murderous madness begin? After 4 months of auditions, Holland finally has the answer. Little reveals his first murder to him. There is something striking. It's the way in which Samuel Little tells this event. He tells it with a smile that suggests that he remembers those moments with a lot of pleasure. He seems to see the scene again in his eyes and repeat it. There is even a sign that Holland tells. As soon as Little entered the life of the matter, his leg began to shiver. Everything changed one summer day in 1970. At the time, Samuel Little was just 30 years old and he lives in Florida. And it is in a poor suburb of Miami that he crosses the road of a young woman, Mary Brosley. He remembers it by heart. He gives fascinating details. He tells that he remembers his necklace very well, his necklace of chains. In fact, he remembers the clickety of the chain of his necklace while he raped her. Stephen Boucher, journalist, specialist of winter events. In fact, it is something that marked his spirit. And to see her die between his hands, it provoked a kind of extreme enjoyment. This pleasure of possessing the life of others. What he tells is like a real enjoyment, a discovery. And he knows that from now on he will not be able to stop. Physically, intellectually, sexually, he realizes his fantasies. It's very good for him. He loves it. He has a lot of pleasure. When you eat chocolate and it is so good, you take a second square. Well, it was the same for him. He loved what he did so much that he started again. Addicted to his first murder, Samuel Little will not stop killing until his arrest in 2012. For more than 40 years, he has killed women in all impunity in more than 14 states. And in front of Olan, he will finally confess 93 murders. Numbers that give the vertigo. But there is a problem. How to identify all these victims so long after? The ranger then has a great idea. Olan has this idea to say, since you are so precise sometimes in your memories, rather than telling me, why don't you draw them? Little will end up with a box of colored pencils, like at school. And he will start drawing his victims, the memory he has of his victims. These are rather well-painted paintings. There is a kind of crime aesthetic behind all this. He loved to redraw faces. These are all faces in suffering. Sad women. Some faces already have faces of death. You can even read in some people's eyes. You can read fear. You read feelings, which is very disturbing when you look at them. Little paints his cell with the faces of his victims. Drawings as precise as his memories that the whole of America will now discover. In fact, the FBI police will publish some of his drawings to make calls to witnesses to see if this face that was painted by the killer does not correspond to a forgotten victim on the path of Samuel Little. Samuel Little, 78 years old, has confessed to more than 90 murders. He is the most prolific serial killer in the United States. He is currently helping investigators identify his victims by drawing their portraits. November 2018. The United States discovers with horror the one that the press now calls the Picasso of crime. Samuel Little is one of all the media. An unprecedented shock wave. What strikes Americans is the fact to learn all these crimes at once. They wake up one morning and they are told the worst serial killer in this country has just been found. His name is Samuel Little. He has committed 93 murders. And the Americans are both shocked and they are angry. This guy has been under the radar for almost 40 years. Public opinion wonders why this guy was left to operate as he wanted for so many years. How could he have escaped the police for so long? The question obsesses the public. But from his cell, Samuel Little has a chilling answer. It is to a journalist from the New York Times that he will make this terrible confession. He will ask her during an interview that he accepts. During the conversation, Little tells he could not have killed her, because she would have looked for herself. He continued, "You count yourself, you are a journalist, I will not kill a journalist. I would be looked for afterwards. If I kill a prostitute, if I kill a drug addict, he does not care." He says, "Well, these are victims who looked like me. I stayed in my ghetto. I did not leave the ghetto where I was." This case, Samuel Little, beyond the purely criminal springs, it enlightens this America a little, this double-faced America. Because in fact, this absolutely terrible criminal saga took place a little bit in the sewers of today's America. And that's what it reveals. That is to say that there is a two-faced America. There is that of the ghettos and the America a little bit honorable. Prostitutes, drug addicts, often black or Hispanic, these victims who lived on the margins of society have never been sought. Samuel Little is the sad symbol of this America, split in two. After 6 months of interviews between the two men, James Holland has accomplished his mission. He made Samuel Little confess. In all, 93 murders. And the Ranger is categorical. At no time has Samuel Little expressed the slightest remark. One of the sentences that perhaps allows to approach the psychology of Samuel Little is when he speaks of God. He says, God knew exactly what I was doing. According to his own words, he was an instrument, a passive instrument of the higher drawings. He speaks of God, but obviously, he thinks more of the devil. Instrument of God or instrument of the devil, his ferocious mission ended on December 30th, 2020 in a Los Angeles County prison. The serial killer died there at the age of 80.